Stella, it's so great to have you. I'd love to kick things off with just a little bit more about your story and how you met the Trello co-founders and what it was like in the very, very early days.
The story has always been in startups. I did a startup right out of college that was a payment startup called Fee Fighters. And we had a very curious guy giving a quote on our homepage. And it turned out that he would later become the co-founder of Trello. And he reached out to me a few years after that startup had been acquired by Groupon, and wanted me to come on board as the first marketing executive, and right after the Series A. And it was really exciting for me because I was using Trello I had my own startup at the time, so I was using it to run my startup. I was using it to plan a wedding. And so it was very meta to get to work and tell the story of Trello to so many other people. So I joined the team, and we were really focused on growth in the beginning. We only started focusing on monetization in the last couple of years. And so what the team looked like in the early days was very small, a very tight-knit executive team as well, which I'm happy to talk about. And we grew up until, I think we were about a team of 10 to 12 people at the time that Atlassian acquired Trello in 2017. And now the team is double that size, about 20 people. But Atlassian's org is much larger. It's about, I think, 400 or 500 people. So we're able to draw in a lot of different subject matter experts. And so I'm happy to chat about all of the early days things, about bigger company things, career progression, hiring, team composition, all of the things.
Yeah, that sounds great. So in the early days of Trello, how did you balance both strategy and execution? Because we have a good mix of people on the call that are still in the position where they're writing some of the blog posts, they're creating some of the content, they're doing a mix of like high level strategy plus execution. How did you level set with the founders, and what did your early playbook look like to ensure that you had the time and the ability to do the combination of both?
That's a great question. And I think that's one of the reasons to join a startup, I think, because you get to do the marketing craft and you get to be on the ground floor and doing all the things. It's also one of the reasons it's also tough because you can't really pass the buck on to anyone else. I remember my very first day at Trello, I had to write a tweet, and we already had a few thousand followers, and it was like such a big deal to get to tweet from the Trello account. So I would say that you have to really think about the highest leverage way to spend your time and divide it out between being strategic, which should be alongside all of the other executives, where either you're having weekly meetings, or I would hope weekly meetings, or anything more close where you have that time to be strategic. But then just as it's the same, I think, with every other functional leader, where there is a lot more execution that they have to do in the early days. I think that's very common. And I think with marketing, one of the biggest things I would really impress upon folks here, in the early days, it's almost as much about what you don't do as what you actually do. So I would spend a lot of time in the sort of strategic mindset, thinking about which channels and strategies you want to devote resources to, and be very clear on the ones that you are not going to devote resources to. For example, my team was always like, they really wanted to do Snapchat in the early days. And I was like, there is no way in hell we're doing Snapchat. They could barely convince me to do Instagram from an organic, not paid standpoint. But even actually a good example from the early days, and even really up until acquisition, is that we did not spend any time or money or resources on paid acquisition because our organic growth was so great that it really did not make sense from like a unit economic standpoint to focus on paid marketing. And so much of, let's say, a B2C marketing strategy will include doing a lot of channel exploration from a paid standpoint. So we were just very clear, like, we're not going to focus on paid acquisition. There's no way that this makes sense for us.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. We do have a good mix of bottom-up SaaS companies and some consumer companies on the line as well. How did you think about, I know we've talked a little bit about growth and more user acquisition. To
Yeah.
what extent were you involved in writing like email campaigns, life cycle programs? Did you get pretty involved in engagement and retention in the early stages as well?
I did all of it. I think in up until basically hiring, I hired my very first hire was a content marketer, and then the second hire was a product marketer who actually he didn't know it at the time, but he was coming from support and was doing product marketing and just didn't realize that making all of this content and helping users with the product was marketing and not necessarily support. So maybe that's another interesting tidbit is to see a lot of times the best marketers may not be bringing someone in from the outside, but it might be someone who is at the company already. Trello was, I think, about like 12 to 15 people when I joined. So in the early days, I was doing everything. I set up our email platform. I set up our blog. I was writing the blog posts. And obviously that's not scalable, but I do think that it's very important to it's a great onboarding opportunity to learn about the product, to also get buy-in from your fellow teammates. And Trello in the beginning was very dev focused. Most of the employees were engineers and they didn't really believe in marketing. They were like, oh, if you build a good product, that people will come, which I think is a very common engineering mindset. And so it was really up to me to build the bridges and to explain like what marketing does and how marketing can help and build out sort of the campaigns and proof points to show that when we invested in certain things, we could see our user numbers exponentially grow.
Yeah, that's great. In the early days, when you were first working directly with the founders, how did you think about goal setting and how did you manage their expectations? Because I hear this a lot where you're wearing many hats, there's a lot of jobs to be done. What sort of goals did you bring to the founders and how did those evolve over time?
So we were really informal. I feel like I was the one who was trying to get us to be more data driven in the early days because it was a lot of our team was very focused on building like the very best product and our user numbers were growing already. So we didn't have I don't think we had a lot of structure in place. I was really pushing us to leverage PR as a channel because I had seen a lot of success with that previously where we could set up like a cadence of product news and updates maybe every 60 days or so. And so I would really push our product folks to commit to a product roadmap, which is like the hardest thing. I think people here will probably empathize with that, but to use that like PR push or that storytelling to have some sort of a cadence where we could be reaching out to reporters regularly. And it worked really well for us in the early days, especially basically up until the acquisition, it worked really well where if we had something interesting to tell the press, to tell our users, frequently that would be a way to stay top of mind and to grow our user base. Because we would see every time we did some sort of campaign, we would see an increase in our slope and then things would like taper off a little bit, but then there would be a new plateau from where we would continue growing our user base.
That makes sense. Was marketing pretty heavily involved? Like it sounds like Team to Date was largely engineering. Were you one of the first people to do more user groups and customer facing events? And how did you think about building a community around the product?
Yeah, so community has been a really big thing for us, interestingly from the beginning, but I would couple it with brand. When I came in, we had some basic product principles, but one of the earliest exercises I did was bring in a brand strategist and help us really define what our brand meant and what we wanted it to be, how we were differentiated from other tools in the market. And from there, it gave us a common language to speak when we were doing both marketing releases, product releases, and also interacting with our customers, which was our users, which was always really important. We had, I think back in those days when you hired a social media person, that was also considered like a community building person. So we had a Slack for our most active users that we had a few hundred people in, and we would reach out to them to get feedback on features and to interview them. We would use social media also as a way to get user stories out, and we were very active about showcasing different use cases for Trello within all of our content strategy and building community that way. I think it's interesting. I feel like community is such a buzzword these days, but I feel like for us, it really meant like creating this brand that people could identify with, that they could have a relationship with, and then also providing all of these outlets for them to connect with the brand.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I also find today community can be really hard to create a shared definition around, specifically for more horizontal bottom-up SaaS companies, because the product can be used for so many different use cases. Like going back to your own personal way of using Trello, like you could be a startup founder that's using it for a startup or for planning your wedding or for organizing activities outside of work. To what extent did you lean into some of those non-traditional use cases as the head of marketing? Or did you stay pretty focused on the core use case and ones that would drive maybe more adoption or help you land and expand inside of other companies?
So it was a very strategic decision to be horizontal for us. We resisted developing personas for a while, up until we decided to get serious about our business class product. But I think in some ways it was good for Trello because we were able to grow really fast and from a user base standpoint. And we had this sort of idea that Trello could be used by the whole person. We had these examples of someone using Trello at work and then using Trello to run their PTA. And we really leaned into that. And I think in the early days, I think it's a maturation of the business where once we started to focus more on our business and enterprise products, that's when we lean more into more traditional B2B marketing like persona development and use case development and being very thoughtful about our onboarding experience and what types of examples that we gave people in our onboarding experience. And then even in the last, let's say, even the last 6 months, we just did a giant rebrand in February, and that was very focused on shifting the perception of Trello's brand to be away from personal with a bit of business and to be very squarely focused on the business use case.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting because I feel like Trello is one of the first SaaS companies that comes to mind that was incredibly horizontal and speaking to the whole person. Did that mean from a marketing standpoint, was there a bit of category creation to be done? Did journalists automatically get it, or did users automatically get it? Or did you have to create a lot more content and more use case specific messaging even for the website?
The thing that we resisted early on was to be pigeonholed into a project management category, because I do think we were category creators, because on Monday and all of these other things I don't think that they existed, or they might have been even smaller. And those companies all focused on business from the very beginning. So I think if you take a look at, they were focused on not just business, but monetization. Asana, I don't think had, or I'm trying to remember, I think that they've done a bunch of testing with their free trial. Like they had a free product and then they didn't have a free product and then they did. And we've always squarely had this very robust free product. And that was part of our sort of initial user promise, was that there would always be a free product. There was definitely category creation. We tried really hard not to be pigeonholed, but it was also very confusing from a marketing standpoint, because people would try to say, what is Trello? And we were constantly trying to to answer that question with being the most broad thing, but also something that people could actually, use. I don't necessarily recommend that to other people, but it was very much a core part of what we were trying to build.
Yeah, that makes sense. As far as your second marketing hire, the product marketer, was this person tasked with coming up with some of that messaging and really defining each new feature and making that clear? Or how did you start to solve for that over time?
We worked very closely with our product team. I think we didn't even realize that we were doing product marketing, because I feel like product marketing has also exploded as a discipline in the last 5 to 7 years. But it was basically like we were a team and we were all really fixated less on our roles, but on more on delivering the best product or the best features, let's say, to the end users. And everyone was very passionate about the mission. So like we would come up with the messaging together, like I would write the post, or we'd write the post together, or Brian, who is the product marketer in this story, who's still a lot of folks are still here even 7 years later. So it's so funny to think back, but we would just all work together on it and hammer out the messaging. We had a PR firm from the early days that would help us gut check and make sure that it was appropriate for the goals that we were trying to achieve. And then we would develop assets that, were good for the brand. And I think I would also emphasize just how important that brand was, because people came to expect a certain something from Trello. And we were very committed to having user delight and fun, and having our voice be very casual. Those were all things that I think people assume just happen, but they were all very codified by the marketing team with a lot of buy-in from the product team. So there was so much like hand-holding and working together. And I would also just let other folks know that I think that's such a big takeaway, that in the early days, not to fixate too much on your role or on, titles, but more on working together and trying to achieve a greater good for your user.
Yeah, that brings up a really interesting point in a trend that I'm seeing broadly, where now that startups are thinking more remote first, and they're thinking about how to keep the team as lean as possible for as long as possible, I am actually seeing like fewer and fewer product managers and PMMs and certain specialized roles at the earliest stages. It does feel like startups are choosing to hire engineers that are product minded to keep the team lean and very technical for a while, and not hire too many PMs too early. And then on the marketing side, it's a little bit harder to hire for this role, but hiring marketers that are really deeply understand product design, or really deeply enjoy writing content, but are also high level on strategy as well. Did you find in the early stages with Trello, were you getting pretty involved in some of the design decisions and like how they thought about UX and UI? Or at what point did there start to be a split between like marketing, design, and other parts of the organization?
Well, I think we always had a very collaborative culture. That was just the nature of our culture, very open, collaborative. And so in some ways it was great, because it's totally fine for a marketer to be commenting on design stuff and for a designer to be commenting on marketing stuff. At the same time, you had this situation where everyone had an opinion about everything, and you want to not default to making decisions by committee. But for us, in building a tool that helped with collaboration, it was just a part of our culture for everyone to feel comfortable in having opinions. And even, I'm just thinking, last week we had a big internal debate within the Trello team about whether the product choices that we're making were still true to our core mission. And this is like within Atlassian, which is a multi-thousand person company. So I would say it really depends on the culture that you're trying to build too. Michael and the whole executive team were all committed to really having a culture that was similar to our product. It was almost like our product, we shipped our culture, which was fun and thoughtful and delightful, simple, easy to use. That's also how we ran the team. And we also had a very flat, I would say, org structure for a long time. And that was because so much of the way that the org was run was very like thinking about empowering the individuals and letting smart people do what they wanted to do, and that sort of, and a lot of features maybe we didn't talk about building, and an engineer would just build it overnight and because they wanted to. That a lot of that happened and became core features in Trello.
That's great. Yeah, that's awesome. It's so impressive to hear that most of the team is still there as well. So I would love to, dig in a little bit on, as you were making some of those first few hires, as you were helping guide their career as well. What advice do you give to new managers or future managers, both when it comes to how to hire the right people, and what were some of the programs and things that made the Trello culture one where people have stayed even post-acquisition?
Yeah, I think as new managers, and I definitely had this earlier in my career, you just want to do everything and make every decision and be involved in everything. And as you go on in your management career, you realize that what you really want to do is put yourself out of a job every 6 months and feel very comfortable with that, because that means that you're hiring and delegating and developing your team so that a lot of things can run without you. In the early days, every single newsletter, I wrote everything. I made up the thing where, I don't know if anyone notices, the emails come from Taco, who is our spokes husky, who you can see in my background here. That was something that I just did myself, and I did every newsletter myself. And then all of a sudden, I had an amazing content marketer who didn't need me as much anymore to do it. And even though I would approve the newsletter, maybe like 1 to 2 years into it, I never touched the newsletter again, and the content team just ran with it. And it's really, that's how you want to build your team. So like today I have a team that does brand and all of content and social media. That's 3-ish folks. And we utilize a lot of freelancers for that as well, and have since our early days. And then we have a growth and customer lifecycle marketing team. And then we have a product marketing team. And we also have an enterprise team as well that focuses just on our enterprise products. I think that we have a lot of fun. We try not to take ourselves too seriously. We were very early on doing remote work. We've been a remote team since the very beginning, with an office in New York. And our team over the years has done the most amazing fun offsites. We've gone wine tasting in Napa multiple times. We've gone boating in Austin. We've done all of the New York things, Broadway, pizza, like it, and that just builds those relationships. I think as more companies are doing hybrid work, we haven't had the opportunity to be face-to-face in a long time, but it's so important, and it's such a critical part of team building. That's the culture bit. In terms of developing the team and being a good manager, I think when you hire people, you want to not hire for a specific thing that you need to accomplish today. I think you want to hire smart people who have the potential to develop into whatever areas that are necessary. Some of the most successful people on my team have held many different roles over the years, and that's also what keeps people around, and that's also what keeps people excited about developing in their careers. So that's probably, I guess, some managerial advice to impart, is to just, maybe that person doesn't quite have the skill set you're looking for, but they are a go-getter and they're maybe a couple of years younger than you wanted, or maybe if it isn't quite right, but you have the feeling that this person can really develop over time, to take a risk on people like that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that you brought up Taco, because I remember when Slack was first becoming a big thing at work, and there were their own custom emojis like the party parrot, and they have all these cute integrations. And like that, actually, I think Taco was the first real SaaS icon. There was Clippy at Microsoft, but then I think Taco was one of the first. I was like, this is really cute. I like where Trello is going with just the fun nature of the brand.
Yeah, we wanted to make project management not this, we're coming from this background of capital P, capital M project management with Gantt charts, and we just wanted it to be very accessible, and we wanted it to be something that anybody could use. That was the strategy.
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm actually going to transition and invite some people up to speak, because I know we have a lot of questions, and so many people are so excited to learn from your experience. See. Okay, so I invited a few people up to speak. We'll see when they're ready to go. We do have a question from Open Phone, who I know that you've met. Here we go. So, question from Open Phone. We're transitioning from a one-person marketing team. Hi.
Oh, hey. Oh, sorry. I didn't realize I'm like right
That's
here
okay.
already.
I didn't want to speak for you. Go ahead.
Cool. Thank you. Sorry, it was a little weird how I'm like, I'm here immediately. This is cool. Hi, Stella. Nice to meet you. Darina from Open Phone. Really big fan of what you've done at Trello. I think we are a horizontal product, so there are definitely a lot of similarities I'm seeing. A question I have is maybe very situational. We literally just had someone join as our first person on the marketing team who is not me, which is incredibly exciting. Thank you. And they are actually a product marketing manager. I think what you just mentioned about hiring someone who's amazing, who could grow into different roles, I can definitely see that. But I am still curious, given we grow the team and we will have more specialization, could you share a little bit about what do amazing product marketers do in an early team? Maybe that's very specific to product marketing.
Absolutely. Congrats on your first hire. That's so exciting. I'm sure for you, you don't have to do everything. But I would say that the first product marketer, any product marketer, their job is to be, number one, the voice of the customer. So figuring out what the customer needs, wants, is thinking, interacting with the product. And number two, to be developing all of the messaging and positioning and all of the assets that are critical for success, whether that's sales enablement materials, if you're relying on a sales team, whether that's creating gifts and product materials, whatever it is for an upcoming launch. The early product marketer is like a jack of all trades, but if the sort of core thing that all product marketers do is that they are best friends with your product managers. And if you are in a situation where you are doing the traditional triad of like engineer, designer, product manager, I love having PMMs on those triads or quatrads or whatever it is as well. Maybe only the things that are customer facing if you're spending a lot of time on like infrastructure, anything that's not customer facing. But that product marketer, they're the expert on how to communicate the value of whatever you're building to the customer, how to create the materials for whatever it is. And also a big value that product marketers bring to the table is being the glue between all of the different parts of the org. So product marketers can help support, they can help sales, they can help PMs, they can help, and they have that language that's not the product language, but the sort of more normal person, human language, whatever you want to say, to be able to make that connection.
Thanks so much. That helps. I'm excited. I'm excited to not be the only one writing emails too. Thank you.
Hi, Maria. Congrats today. Big day for Chart Hop.
Thank you so much. Yeah, for everybody, we just announced our Series B, so super. It's been a crazy day on social. I'm like trying to keep up with everything, as you said, like trying to do everything. So I'm glad I was able to join. I actually have a quick question because like I use Trello, actually, I love it. And I'm wondering what was the transition like from going more B2C to actually transitioning to more B2B? And we were thinking about going the other way around, where we're very B2B and want to have a self-serve product, and just any insights you can share would be extremely helpful.
We were actually, I would call us more like B2B2C. We were never, I don't think we were ever like traditionally B2C, but I think that there are, with B2B and with product-led growth, especially now, there's a little bit more of a playbook that you can follow where you have like your self-serve product, and then you have the things that you can do to grow the self-serve product. For example, focusing on product marketing, focusing on growth marketing, really thinking about what that user journey is, how to do messaging within the product or whatever it is that makes people go to conversion and beyond. And then you have your high touch, which is a very different motion, which is more about working with sales and pipeline development and sales enablement and MQLs and all of that stuff. So I feel like in some ways it is, there's some sort of scaffolding in place that you can follow where you don't necessarily need to make everything up. And also with being B2C, there's more. I haven't done traditional B2C. Most of my career has been in B2B, but I would imagine there's a lot more fun that you can have with focusing on different channels and thinking about the marketing funnel and spending in different channels and developing different collateral, et cetera, based on the channel that you're doing. And I think it'd be fun to do Instagram ads and stuff. We've dabbled a little bit in it, and the conversion rates have never been particularly promising. So I would say keep an open mind and also really focus on the highest leverage activities. I would do some experimentation, but if you have things that you know are working well, maybe it's partnerships, maybe it's community, maybe it's content marketing. See if there are ways that you can translate that to your different customer. Because one thing that has always held true in my career and the way that I build marketing teams is to think about your end user as being human, and all humans have the same basic desires and interests. It's to be better, to do good, to perform at a higher level, or whatever it is. In our blog, we think a lot about like, how do we help people be more productive, whether that means with their time, with their energy, with their teams, and how can we create content that, even though it's not about Trello or project management necessarily. So that's just, I would think about it more holistically and be very thoughtful about which channels you're going after and how you spend your time.
Stella, quick question following up on the user journey map. Is that something that you suggest a marketer does in their first like 30, 60, 90 days? And how often should you revisit what that customer journey looks like? Because I feel like that's something that can get increasingly complex as you add more email nurture programs, or as you add, like in ChartHub's case, like when you're Series B and you have a customer success team, like how do you think about dividing and conquering on some of this customer journey work?
Yeah. For Trello, it was always extremely messy. I'll say that, because our product doesn't have a very traditional customer journey or funnel. So we've always struggled with that, and I think are getting a little bit more formalized with that. But I think that's a bread and butter also of the product marketer in terms of being the voice of the customer. They have to understand what that user experience is like and work very closely with design and product to help solve for areas that can be improved. And if you are doing paid marketing, or if you just have access to funnel analytics, that can be an area that marketing can really provide value, where you're looking at the analytics and you can see the drop off happening between different parts of the funnel, and what can we do in product, or what can we do with our emails, or whatever it is to nurture and make those conversion rates better. I'm laughing because one thing that we have never been able to figure out how to do is in product messaging. It's like something that marketing at Trello has always wanted to do, and we've never been able to do it. I know that's a very great channel, but actually for us, we found that when we ran experiments, email was actually a more effective channel at reaching users than in product, which was mind-blowing to me.
Interesting. One more question, and then I'll pass it over to someone else. When building on the in-product messaging, to what extent are you involved in in-product growth experiments and some of the like land and expand strategies that can be really effective for horizontal SaaS products and ones that transition well into team and company-wide adoption?
Yeah, so that's what our product marketers do. They sit on those teams and they help provide that marketing voice, so that if we're not necessarily thinking about something, or if there's an opportunity to make it more on brand. I'll give an example. So 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, we launched templates in Trello, which we'd actually always been resistant to because we never wanted to be prescriptive with Trello usage, but it was something that our users were asking for years, and it's still the number one thing. I feel like I'm using Trello wrong. How can I use Trello better? And so we did a big product push to launch a template gallery. And that was really spearheaded by one of the product marketers who's focused on growth. And so part of what she did was she helped understand which use cases should be highlighted in the template gallery, working with our comms team to tell the story to the press, thinking about what features we can put on templates that will make them do have more of that virality versus just being a single player thing. So that's a really great example, I think, of where a product marketer and maybe a growth marketer, I think a lot of times so much of the job descriptions and titles are really interchangeable, or like they don't get super specific until you get a much larger team where, for example, at Atlassian, a product marketer versus a growth marketer have very different jobs. But I think at a startup, you could potentially be using those things interchangeably, or maybe the growth marketer has slightly more of an experimentation mindset and the product marketer has a little bit more of a messaging and positioning mindset, but really should be able to do both of those jobs. I think we have one more gentleman here.
Yeah, it's me. I was wondering if I was going to get, I don't know, called on, but I'm happy to ask my question. So we're a relatively early stage company looking to make our first marketing hire. And so I'm curious, what profile of person would you look for? Because it sounds like you were able to set up a foundation, really quickly get in and implement some strategies, introduce the voice of marketing to the team. We're trying to find someone with a similar profile that wants to do that here at Fourth Wall, which is the company that I'm building. And curious where you would look for someone like that, what attributes you think make someone successful as that first marketing hire. I don't know, red flags, anything to help us hire someone great.
That's awesome. What was your name? I'm sorry.
I'm Walker, sorry.
Walker.
Yeah.
So Walker, this is literally probably like top 3 question that I get. And so I have a very good answer for you. I think that the first thing you need to decide is what like seniority or what type of experience do you want that person to bring in. It's less about seniority and more like experience, because I think there's a lot of value in taking a risk on someone junior who has demonstrated in some other sphere like a lot of gumption and drive and ambition and wants to make their name. Those types of people are a lot harder to find, but I find that those people can be very impactful in the early days. Or you can choose to go a more strategic route and bring in someone who maybe has led marketing at a company before. You could also go a route that I think is probably a good route for a lot of people, which is you try to poach someone who is at a big company who has like a product marketing background, or if you're focused on brand, or if you have some idea of what is important in your business, to take someone who's at a bigger company and poach them to come work at the startup. Unfortunately, the job market is crazy right now for marketers. Yeah. Like the demand far outweighs the supply, which is great for the marketers, but not so great for the folks looking to hire. I'd say one mistake that some people make is that they want to bring in like a CMO or someone who has a very like maybe corporate background. And those people tend to not succeed in a startup environment because they're used to a lot of resources, they're used to a lot of process, and they're used to having people that can do things for them. That's not everybody. I don't want to generalize, but I know that like if I was to come from Atlassian, I'm just used to having a 500-person team, and it's just a shift in your mindset when you have to be the one who's doing all the things. And some people really want that, and some people would not thrive in that role. That's why I think that there's a lot of opportunity in starting with someone who is maybe slightly more junior but has the potential to grow into a great leader. But then there's also a risk in doing that too. So I would say like you pick an area that is important to you. One other thing to keep in mind, I think that marketers tend to come in 2 flavors. There tend to be the very technical, really data-driven, SEO, performance type marketers. And then there tend to be the marketers that are the more creative, brand, PMM, storytelling type people. And it's very rare to find someone who is smack dab in the middle. I don't think I've ever met anyone like that. I am much more on the brand creative side, but I can definitely do the more technical and data stuff. But you have to understand which of those skill sets is more important to you, and that'll help you figure out whether it's the right type of person.
It makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Now, once I've told you that, you're going to see everyone that you hire and talk to, you're going to put them in that continuum.
Somewhere on the spectrum. Yeah, absolutely.
Stella, did you look for initially people that had some SaaS experience or some exposure to other companies in the category, or were you open to hiring people with completely different backgrounds?
I was very open. Like, to me, especially, I think SaaS has grown and matured so much. And in the early days, that's a generalization, so much in the time that since Trello has been around. So in the early days, if I had tried to find someone with SaaS experience, it would probably be at a detriment to us because, number one, we were trying to build a different kind of model. Slack was just launching around the same time. So there weren't a lot of people that had that SaaS experience. And number two, we were trying to be this consumerization of enterprise software, which is like a token phrase now, but we were very much first in doing that, or one of the first. And so I think for me, it was much more important to find people who were smart, creative. I remember our first content hire, she wrote in her application, I'll never forget, it was a love letter to Taco. And she's at Trello to this day, Lauren Moon, she's all over the blog. She's done 5 different roles at Trello. And when I read that, like, I just got goosebumps thinking about it, how she so embodied the brand and like what we wanted to build, that I didn't really care that she didn't have 5-10 years of experience. She had some experience, but not in SaaS, and maybe not the very most relevant.
That makes sense. One question from Tommy Dang, which I think is a really good one that comes up a lot, and it's how do you focus on a specific channel or tactic, and at what point do you start adding additional channels? I find what we tend to see in early stage is a lot of teams are optimizing for launch, so they're getting email campaigns in a good place, they're writing copy and getting ready for a product hunt launch or a Hacker News launch. After that, what is the next logical step as far as thinking about channel development? And for a company that's horizontal like Trello, at what point did you start experimenting with new channels?
Great question. It's complicated and probably different for every company, but I would say that when you experiment, you get some hints or some signs that some things are working, and you'll pretty quickly see that maybe doing co-marketing with other companies in your space is generating a lot of leads, or maybe it's the community building. So I would say, like, maybe pick 3 channels or something, however much your team can handle, and invest like a good amount of time and resources into doing it. Or maybe doing a test, like maybe you do 1 ebook or 1 thing or 1 co-marketing campaign and see what happens, and then really dive into and devote more resources into the things that work. And once you have 1 or 2 things that are working, it becomes a lot easier to add more, because you have these economies of scale, where all of a sudden, if you're developing 1 piece of content, it becomes a lot easier to make it more of an integrated marketing campaign where it touches lots of different parts of the marketing funnel, and even potentially. But like I said, I think sometimes startups will try to make things happen because they're sexy or because it's the thing to do, and it just might not be right for your business. So try to be very, what's the right word? Have discipline about experimentation, and then being okay with moving on, even if it's the sexy thing that other people are doing.
Yeah, that's such a great point. How did you think about, one final question, and then we'll see if anyone else has one as well, how did you think about content development? Because one of the interesting things with Trello is it's a pretty integrations heavy business. And you also have a lot of different use cases and a lot of people on the team that they themselves are using Trello. Did you engage the broader team to encourage them to contribute content to the blog? And to what extent was Anthony, who does a lot of the product integrations and partnerships, involved in some marketing related activities?
I have always been a huge fan of content and content strategy as a big lever for marketing. When I started, HubSpot was a big inspiration for what I was trying to build with Trello. Was HubSpot had all of this content for marketers. And I was like, and it was very approachable. And I was like, why don't we should do the same thing, but have it be about project management and being productive with your time. And later it became adding remote work and remote collaboration, because that was something that everyone on the team was passionate about. But we encourage everyone to write blog posts. That was also part of that open and collaborative culture. So if you look in our early blog posts, actually one of the designers was blogging a lot in the beginning. And as we decided to not focus on a more technical audience, it became much more hand-holding the team if they wanted to write on the blog, but we definitely encouraged it. And Anthony's a great example. Anthony was always such a great partner to our team. We would have weekly meetings with Anthony trying to figure out how we can get partners involved and try to leverage our audience and user base in ways that made our partners feel like it was a valuable relationship, but also useful for our users. So I guess maybe the theme of this is about being open and collaborative and seeing where partnerships within the company can go. So we still meet with Anthony to this day, and he doesn't even focus on Trello partnerships, but we still, I think we have regular chats with him and Trello marketing.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's great. This has been such a fun session. Happy to learn more about Taco and how Taco came about. Great to hear just some of the tactics and strategies that you've implemented, both for Trello, but also in your own personal career. It's so amazing to hear that the people that you hired in the very, very early stages are still at the company. And so that says a lot about your thoughtfulness and your leadership and your ability to really build such a strong team. So thanks so much for joining us today. Everyone, chat's blowing up. Everyone really enjoyed the conversation. And so I'll be sure to share the video and also make some intros as well for people that want to catch up with you one-on-one.
That sounds great. Thanks, Brianne. Thank you,
Awesome.
everyone, for coming.
Thanks so much for
Bye.
joining. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.